"Save me," she whispered. The rancher faced the cruel wrath of the devil's bloodline. The sun was just beginning to set behind the rolling hills, casting long golden shadows over the vast fields of John Carter's ranch. The air smelled faintly of hay and fresh earth, the quiet broken only by the lowing of cattle and the occasional crow of a rooster somewhere in the distance. John wiped the sweat from his brow, his hands rough from years of tending to the land. This ranch had been in his family for generations, and every inch of it carried memories, both joyful and painful. Yet tonight, as he paused to take in the peaceful view, a strange unease settled over him. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something felt off. The Carter Ranch was a place that had seen its share of storms, both literal and figurative. Droughts had tested their resilience, harsh winters had claimed livestock, and neighbors had occasionally squabbled over landlines or grazing rights. But through it all, John had managed to keep the ranch running, relying on a mix of stubborn determination, hard work, and respect for the land. The isolation that came with ranch life suited him. He liked the quiet, the routine, and the simple satisfaction of seeing a job well done. But tonight, the calm felt fragile, as if the world was holding its breath. As he made his way back to the house, the wooden boards of the porch creaking under his boots, John noticed something unusual near the gate. At first he thought it was just a shadow cast by the trees swaying in the evening breeze, but as he stepped closer, he saw her, a young woman, crouched low on the ground, her clothes torn and covered in dirt. She looked almost like a ghost in the fading light, her hair matted and face pale. When she saw him, her eyes widened in fear, and she whispered something so faint that he almost didn't hear it. "Save me!" John's instincts kicked in immediately. He dropped his tools and hurried down the steps, calling out softly, "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The woman flinched, but didn't move. Her eyes darted toward the darkening woods beyond the fence, and she shivered violently. John could see she had been running, and running hard. Her shoes were scuffed, and a streak of blood ran down her arm. She looked exhausted, terrified, and desperate. There was no doubt in John's mind. She needed help, and fast. He knelt beside her, speaking in calm, steady tones, trying to reassure her. "You're safe now. Come inside. We'll get you cleaned up." It took several minutes, but eventually she allowed him to help her to her feet. Her body trembled so violently that John had to support her as they walked toward the house. Every step was careful. He didn't want to alarm her further, and he didn't know what or who might have been chasing her. She held her head low, barely meeting his gaze. But John noticed the fear in her eyes. Real, unyielding fear. The kind that came from facing something far beyond ordinary danger. Once inside, he guided her to a chair by the fireplace. The warmth from the fire contrasted sharply with the chill she carried with her, and John fetched a blanket to wrap around her shoulders. He went into the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and brought it back to her. "Drink this," he said gently. "You've been running for a long time." She accepted it with shaking hands, taking small, careful sips. The firelight flickered across her face, revealing striking features, though they were pale and tired. Her eyes, though wide with fear, had a depth to them that suggested intelligence, resilience, and a story that had been hard-lived. John studied her quietly for a moment, trying to understand who she was and why she was here. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. Her voice was barely audible, but she whispered, "Eliza." That was all for now. When he tried to ask more, she shook her head violently, her eyes darting toward the windows, as if expecting someone to appear out of the shadows. John understood. Whatever had driven her to his doorstep was dangerous, and likely not done with her yet. He decided to give her space, understanding that she needed to feel safe before she could trust anyone. Meanwhile, his mind raced. The Carter Ranch was isolated, which usually meant peace. But tonight, that same isolation could be dangerous. If someone was following her, they could be anywhere. Lurking in the woods, hiding in the fields, waiting for the cover of darkness. John didn't panic, though. He had faced storms before, literal ones that had tested his skill and resolve. He could handle this. He had to. As the night deepened, John busied himself with routine chores inside the house. The kettle boiled on the stove, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the familiar smells of home, a mixture of cooked meat, bread, and wood smoke, filled the air. Eliza remained wrapped in the blanket, staring silently into the fire. Occasionally she would whisper fragments of words, names, places, hints of danger, but never enough for John to form a complete picture. Still, every detail mattered. He listened closely, storing each piece of information in his mind, ready to act if needed. Outside, the ranch was cloaked in darkness, and the wind carried whispers through the trees. The cattle settled in their pens, the occasional low moo breaking the quiet. John occasionally glanced out the windows, his senses alert. Shadows moved in the corner of his vision, and the faint rustle of leaves made him tense. He knew the wilderness well. It could be beautiful, serene, and deadly all at once. Something in the air told him that tonight would be remembered, that this quiet evening would mark the beginning of something far larger than a simple act of kindness toward a frightened stranger. Hours passed, and the fire slowly died down. John finally sat across from Eliza, studying her carefully. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "No one can hurt you while you're under my roof." Her lips trembled as she whispered, They're after me." John leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "Who? What are they after?" She hesitated, clearly struggling with fear and the need to confide in someone. Finally, she said in a barely audible voice,
"The Bloodline."
"The devil's bloodline." The words sent a chill down John's spine. He had heard local rumors of a family with a dark history, generations rumored to be ruthless, merciless, and cruel. But he had never thought such stories would walk through his gate in the flesh. His mind raced with questions. Were these people real? Were they capable of harming anyone, anywhere? And most importantly, what had Eliza done to draw their attention? Before he could ask, a sudden noise outside startled them both, a sharp crack like a branch breaking underfoot. Eliza flinched, her eyes wide with panic. John stood quickly, moving toward the door, and peered into the darkness. The wind rustled the leaves, but there was no clear sign of anyone outside. Still, the sense of being watched lingered. Whoever, or whatever, was out there, they were patient, waiting, and very dangerous. John realized he couldn't ignore the threat. He had a choice. He could leave Eliza here and risk the unknown dangers lurking outside, or he could take responsibility, face whatever came, and protect her. His decision was immediate. He would not turn away from someone in need, not when danger was so real. He had spent his life building strength, resilience, and courage, and now it was time to put those qualities to the test. The night stretched on, filled with quiet tension. John prepared extra locks on the doors, checked the fences, and ensured that every possible point of entry was secure. He moved silently, aware that any sound might draw attention. Eliza sat in the corner, wrapped tightly in the blanket, her whispers occasionally breaking the silence as she recalled small details about her pursuers. Each word painted a picture of a relentless family, ruthless and determined, with a history that seemed almost unbelievable. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the hills, John had formed a plan. He would need allies, information, and vigilance. But more than that, he realized that protecting Eliza meant more than just guarding against immediate threats. It meant preparing for a confrontation that would test every skill he had learned from years of working the land. The peaceful life of a rancher was about to collide with the darkness he had only heard about in whispers and warnings. And yet, despite the fear, the exhaustion, and the uncertainty, John felt a strange clarity. He was a man who believed in doing what was right, even when it was dangerous. Tonight, that belief would guide him. Eliza had arrived at his gate not just by chance, but perhaps by fate, and John knew, deep down, that their lives were about to change forever. The morning sun rose slowly over the Carter Ranch, casting a warm glow across the fields. John stood on the porch, sipping his coffee, his mind racing. The previous night had changed everything. The quiet, predictable life he had known was gone. Eliza, the frightened young woman who had appeared at his gate, was not just in danger. She was being hunted by something he barely understood, something that seemed almost unreal. Yet the fear in her eyes had been undeniable, and John knew he could not ignore it. Inside, Eliza sat quietly by the fireplace, her blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She avoided looking directly at him, as if even his calm presence might somehow betray her. John moved to the kitchen making breakfast, the smells of sizzling bacon and fresh bread filling the house. He hoped the routine and warmth would offer some comfort, though he knew that comfort was fragile. After a few moments, he gently asked, "Eliza, can you tell me more about these people? About the devil's bloodline?" She flinched at the name, a shiver running through her body. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was steady enough to hear. They are a family that has terrorized this area for generations. They take what they want to destroy anyone who stands in their way. My family, I escaped them, but they won't let me go easily." Her eyes filled with tears, but she swallowed them quickly. "They are cruel, clever, and powerful. They have a long memory. If they want you gone, they will stop at nothing." John listened carefully. He had heard of families with dark reputations and local stories, but the way Eliza spoke made it real. This wasn't legend or gossip, it was danger, and it had arrived on his doorstep. He knew he needed to understand more. "How did they find you, and why are they after you?" Eliza shook her head. "I don't know. I think it's because of what my grandfather did. The bloodline never forgives. And now, I'm the last one who can speak against them." John's mind went over everything he knew about his land, the people in the surrounding towns, and the stories he had heard as a child. The devil's bloodline was said to be ruthless, always seeking control, revenge, or wealth through intimidation. They were clever, using fear to manipulate and destroy. John felt a chill. He had faced storms, wild animals, and hard winters, but human cruelty, deliberate and methodical, was different. It was personal, and it could follow a person anywhere. Determined to help, John decided he needed to prepare. He started with the ranch itself, inspecting fences, doors, and windows for weaknesses. He knew the isolation that made his ranch peaceful also made it vulnerable. While he worked, he talked quietly to Eliza, trying to learn anything that could help them defend themselves. She told him about sightings of men in dark clothes, shadows moving at the edges of fields, and strange symbols painted on trees near where she had been hiding. The more she spoke, the more John realized the danger was real, and worse, it was organized. By late morning, he had begun to form a plan. Hiding would not be enough. If the devil's bloodline was determined to take her, they would find her no matter where she ran. John knew he had to teach her to survive while also thinking about allies who could help. He decided to contact a few trusted neighbors, people who had known the Carters for years. They were reliable, loyal, and strong, men and women who could stand by him if things got dangerous. He also thought about ways to protect the ranch itself. He could set up lookouts, barriers, and safe areas within the house for emergencies. Eliza, meanwhile, began to open up slowly. She told John stories of her life before the bloodline found her. Days spent in fear, nights spent hiding, moments of hope that were quickly crushed. Listening to her, John felt a mix of anger and sympathy. The cruelty she had endured was unimaginable, yet her courage was remarkable. She had survived this long, escaping when no one else could. And now her survival depended on him, and his willingness to face whatever danger was coming. The afternoon brought more tension. As John repaired the fence near the north pasture, he noticed movement in the trees lining the edge of the property. At first he thought it was a deer or some other animal. But then he saw a flash of dark clothing, a figure moving quickly and silently. His heart raced. He knew immediately it was a scout, someone sent to watch, someone testing the ranch. John didn't panic. He had faced worse in his life, but he understood the stakes now. This was not a casual threat. These people were professional, patient, and dangerous. Inside, Eliza grew anxious as well. She peeked through the window blinds, her fingers gripping the wood tightly. John noticed her tension and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They're out there, but we are ready. We will not let them take you." She nodded, though fear still lingered in her eyes. The two of them worked together to set simple alarms, buckets of stones that would clatter if someone approached, doors that could be barricaded quickly, and signals to alert each other if they were in separate parts of the house. Every precaution counted, because they knew the bloodline would not hesitate to strike at night. As evening approached, the quiet of the ranch returned, but it was a fragile calm. John cooked dinner while Eliza set candles around the house, their soft light adding warmth but also shadows that could conceal movement. They ate in near silence, each lost in thought. John considered the possibility of calling the authorities, but he hesitated. The devil's bloodline had influence and cunning. Involving outsiders could make things worse. He would have to rely on his own skill, resourcefulness, and courage, and he would have to teach Eliza to do the same. That night the wind picked up, carrying an eerie whistle through the trees. John and Eliza sat close to the fire, listening. Every rustle, every snap of a branch made them tense. Around midnight there was a sound outside that froze them both, a deliberate, slow knock on the gate. John's mind raced. He knew better than to open it immediately. Whoever was out there was testing them, daring them to make a move. He whispered to Eliza, "Stay here. Don't come out no matter what you hear." She nodded, gripping the blanket tightly. John stepped outside, careful not to reveal his full figure. The night was dark, and the wind made shadows dance across the ground. The gate was closed and secured, but he noticed something chilling. Symbols carved into the wood, signs that were unfamiliar but clearly meant to intimidate. He knew immediately that this was a message from the bloodline. They were warning him, threatening him, telling him that they were close, watching, and patient. The realization sent a chill down his spine, but it also strengthened his resolve. Returning inside, John closed the door carefully and sat with Eliza. He explained what he had seen, and for the first time she looked at him with more than fear. She looked at him with hope. Someone was willing to fight for her. Together they began to talk about strategies for survival. They discussed escape routes, hiding places, and ways to signal for help if needed. Every word was a small step toward reclaiming some control over their situation. By the early hours of the morning they were exhausted, but more prepared. John felt the weight of responsibility heavily on his shoulders, yet he also felt determination. He had spent his life working with his hands, solving problems, and facing challenges head-on. This was no different, though the stakes were higher than anything he had faced before. Eliza's safety depended on him, and he would not fail. As dawn broke over the ranch, the golden light illuminated the rolling fields once more. It was a beautiful sight, but John knew beauty and danger often walked hand in hand. He and Eliza stood on the porch together, surveying the land. The bloodline was out there somewhere, relentless and cruel. But so were they, determined, prepared, and unwilling to give in. The quiet life of the ranch had ended the moment Eliza appeared at the gate. Now, the peaceful fields were a battleground in waiting, and John understood that every choice, every action, and every moment of courage would matter. And as he looked at Eliza, he realized that this young woman, though frightened, carried a strength he had never seen before, a strength that would be as important as his own in the days to come. The Carter Ranch had always been a place of work, of simple life, and of quiet routines. But now it was a fortress, a place where courage would be tested, and where the shadow of the devil's bloodline loomed closer with every passing hour. And John, for the first time in his life, understood fully that true danger was not the storms or the harsh winters, but the relentless cruelty of those who sought to dominate and destroy. He would face them head-on, and he would not back down. The days that followed were tense, yet strangely alive with purpose. John and Eliza settled into a cautious routine, each day blending preparation with constant vigilance. The ranch, which had always been a place of peace, now felt like a fortress under siege, though the invaders had yet to arrive in full force. Every sound, the snapping of a branch, the distant caw of a crow, even the rustle of leaves, set their nerves on edge. John began by training Eliza in the basics of survival on the ranch. He showed her how to move quietly across the fields without alerting anyone nearby, how to secure doors and windows, and how to hide or defend herself if necessary. At first she was hesitant, afraid she would fail or make a mistake, but John's patience and calm instructions gave her confidence. He reminded her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was moving forward despite it. Together they mapped the property, noting every possible escape route and every place that could serve as a hiding spot. The barns, the old storage sheds, and even a small cave near the creek became potential shelters. John also reinforced weak points in the fences, made sure the livestock were safe, and set up simple alarms. Buckets that would tip if someone stepped near them, bells that would ring if doors were opened, and lines of powder that would mark footprints in the dirt. Every precaution was small, but together they formed a network of safety that would make it harder for intruders to strike undetected. Eliza, despite her fear, began to open up more about the bloodline. She explained that their cruelty wasn't just physical, it was psychological. They used intimidation, whispers, and rumors to weaken their victims before striking. Every gesture, every warning was meant to unnerve those they hunted. John listened closely, storing every detail. Understanding the enemy he knew was as important as defending against them. By the third day, their first real test came. Late in the afternoon, while John checked the northern fence, he noticed movement in the trees again. This time it was closer, more deliberate. He crouched low, keeping himself hidden, and watched as a figure appeared at the edge of the field. The person seemed to be scouting, testing the ranch, and observing without approaching. John recognized the signs. The cautious, calculated movements were not those of a stray traveler or a lost hiker. These were trained, deliberate actions meant to gather information. He signaled to Eliza, who had been watching from the house. Together they observed the figure, noting its patterns and movements. John whispered, "They're testing us. They want to know what we have, what we can do, and how prepared we are." Eliza's hands shook slightly, but she nodded, understanding. This was the moment their training became real. The night that followed was restless. Every noise felt amplified in the darkness. Shadows danced in the corners of the house. The wind seemed to carry whispers. And even the familiar sounds of the ranch, cows lowing, the creek flowing, took on a sinister edge. John stayed awake, patrolling the property with a lantern, while Eliza monitored from the house, her ears straining for any unusual sounds. Together they formed a silent, vigilant team. Days turned into a week, and the bloodline's presence became more noticeable. Strange footprints appeared near the barn. Marks in the dirt suggested someone had been watching the house, and distant figures were occasionally glimpsed moving through the fields at night. John realized that hiding or waiting would not be enough. They would have to act, and they would have to be clever. He decided it was time to gather allies. He called on a few trusted neighbors, men and women who had known him and his family for years. They were loyal, capable, and willing to stand up to threats. John explained the situation carefully, omitting some details to avoid panic, but emphasizing the seriousness of the danger. The neighbors agreed to help, offering their knowledge of the land, their skills, and their willingness to defend the ranch if necessary. With allies in place, John began teaching Eliza more advanced survival techniques. They practiced moving silently across the property, creating diversions and responding to intruders. He taught her to use simple tools for defense and to remain calm under pressure. Each session was grueling, but Eliza improved quickly, her determination growing with every lesson. She began to understand that fear was a tool the bloodline used against her, but courage, true courage, could resist it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they faced their first direct threat. A group of figures appeared near the edge of the property, moving with purpose and coordination. John signaled to Eliza to stay inside while he and the neighbors confronted the intruders. They used the terrain to their advantage, hiding behind trees, using the barns as cover, and signaling each other silently. The confrontation was tense but controlled. The intruders tested the perimeter, attempting to intimidate and probe for weaknesses. John and the neighbors responded strategically, creating noise, setting up diversions, and ensuring no one could get close to the house. The intruders retreated after a few hours, leaving behind signs of their presence, marks on fences, broken branches, and faint tracks in the dirt. It was a warning, a clear message from the bloodline that they were watching, patient and relentless. After the intruders left, John and Eliza inspected the property together. They noted the tracks, repaired the damage, and reinforced their defenses. Eliza's confidence had grown. She had seen the threat firsthand, yet survived and learned. She realized that fear could be managed, controlled, and even used as motivation. John watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. She was strong, but the challenges ahead would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. The following days were filled with preparation and vigilance. John and Eliza worked together tirelessly, improving the ranch's defenses, monitoring the surroundings, and practicing survival techniques. They created safe zones inside the house, mapped escape routes through the fields and woods, and developed signals to communicate quietly. Each action brought them closer together, building trust and creating a partnership that was essential for the challenges ahead. Despite the constant danger, there were moments of calm. They shared meals, talked about simpler times, and began to plan for a future where the bloodline would no longer threaten them. John shared stories of his childhood, of growing up on the ranch, and of the values that had guided him through life. Eliza listened intently, sometimes smiling, sometimes reflecting on her own past. These moments of normalcy, though brief, reminded them both of what they were fighting for, not just survival, but the chance to live without fear. As the nights grew longer, the tension never fully dissipated. Shadows moved in the distance, unfamiliar sounds echoed through the trees, and the knowledge that the bloodline was still out there weighed heavily on them. But John's leadership, combined with Eliza's growing courage, created a sense of resilience. They understood that survival required preparation, intelligence, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Every day was a test, and they were learning to pass it. Then, one night, something happened that would change their approach entirely. While patrolling the perimeter, John spotted a figure near the creek, a young boy, no older than 12, watching the ranch from the shadows. The boy fled when he saw John, disappearing into the trees. The next morning, Eliza discovered a small note left on the porch. It was written in hurried handwriting and contained a single warning: "They are closer than you think." John knew immediately that the bloodline had spies, informants, and people willing to do their bidding. The threat was no longer distant or abstract. It was immediate. They would have to be clever, cautious, and united. There could be no mistakes. Every detail mattered, every precaution counted, and every decision could mean the difference between safety and danger. By the end of Part 3, John and Eliza had transformed from two individuals caught in fear to a team ready to face the challenges ahead. They had learned to move silently, to read signs, to anticipate threats, and to trust each other completely. The ranch, once a place of quiet routine, had become a battlefield of preparation, strategy, and courage. They understood one truth above all: the devil's bloodline was relentless, but they were not powerless. Together, with allies' preparation and determination, they could resist the cruelty and intimidation that threatened their lives. And as the sun rose on the ranch once more, John and Eliza stood together, ready to face whatever the next day and the next threat might bring. The dawn broke over the Carter Ranch with an eerie stillness. The usual morning sounds, the lowing of cattle, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, seemed muted, as if the land itself was holding its breath. John and Eliza stood on the porch, scanning the horizon. The events of the past week had transformed the ranch from a place of quiet work to a fortified stronghold. Every fence had been repaired, every door reinforced, and every hiding place mapped. Still, they knew preparation alone would not guarantee safety. The devil's bloodline was clever and patient. John had a plan. He had spent days studying the terrain, thinking through every possible approach the bloodline might take. He had also trained Eliza relentlessly, and now she was ready to defend herself, to think clearly under pressure, and to act without panic. But nothing could prepare them entirely for what was coming. He could feel it in his bones. The first major confrontation was near. By late afternoon, shadows moved in the distance, subtle at first, almost blending with the trees. John and Eliza watched from the barn loft, their eyes fixed on the field's edge. A group had appeared, 5 figures, moving with quiet, deliberate steps. They were scouts, part of the Bloodline, testing the ranch, learning its defenses and preparing for a larger attack. The sight sent a chill through both of them, but John's resolve did not falter. He had faced danger before, and this time he would not allow fear to control him. He turned to Eliza. "Stay calm. Watch, learn, and remember every detail. Their movements, their timing, their patterns. Everything will help us when the time comes to act." Eliza nodded, gripping her small satchel tightly. She felt a surge of determination. Fear had been her companion for years, but now courage was beginning to take its place. The scouts paused at the edge of the northern fence. One of them raised a small device, perhaps a camera or a sensor, and began examining the perimeter. John observed carefully, noting the positions and timing of their actions. He realized that this confrontation was not just about strength, it was about strategy, observation, and anticipation. He whispered instructions to Eliza on how to respond if they attempted to enter. Suddenly, one of the scouts made a move toward the barn. John tensed. This was the moment to act. Using a series of silent signals, he directed Eliza to a safe spot inside the barn, hidden behind stacked hay bales. She moved quickly and quietly, her heart racing but her mind focused. John stepped out into the open, making himself visible to the scouts. He knew that distraction was a weapon. By drawing attention to himself, he could buy time and create openings for defense. The scout hesitated, then advanced, underestimating John's knowledge of the terrain. John sidestepped, leading the scout toward a tripwire he had set earlier. The wire snapped a small bell, startling the scout and alerting the others. Chaos erupted as the scouts realized the ranch was prepared. John took cover behind a wooden post, signaling to Eliza that it was time to act. She moved swiftly, using the distractions to her advantage. The first confrontation was tense and calculated. John and Eliza worked in tandem, using the ranch's natural features to their advantage. Hay bales, barns, fences, and hidden paths became tools in their strategy. The Bloodline scouts were skilled, but they were not prepared for the precision, determination, and courage of the rancher and the young woman. Each movement, each decision was deliberate, aiming to protect themselves and teach the intruders that the ranch would not be easily conquered. Hours passed in a blur of tension. The scouts attempted various approaches, testing fences, peering through windows, and signaling to one another. John and Eliza remained calm under pressure, observing, reacting, and adapting. Their training, preparation, and understanding of the land proved invaluable. By nightfall, the scouts, realizing that further attempts would be risky, retreated, leaving behind signs of their presence: broken branches, disturbed soil, and a faint warning scrawled on a tree: "You cannot hide." Despite the apparent victory, the encounter left a heavy weight on John and Eliza. They had won the first round, but they understood the Bloodline's true power. They were relentless, intelligent, and cruel, willing to pursue their goals without mercy. The stakes had been raised, and the next confrontation would be even more dangerous. Yet there was also a sense of empowerment. For the first time, Eliza saw that the Bloodline could be challenged, that courage and preparation could turn fear into action. The following days were spent strengthening defenses and refining strategies. John and Eliza analyzed every detail from the confrontation, noting what worked and what needed improvement. They set additional traps, reinforced fences, and created new safe zones inside the house. Eliza's confidence grew with every task she mastered. She practiced moving silently, hiding effectively, and responding quickly under pressure. The partnership between her and John became stronger, each relying on the other's judgment and courage. During this time, they also considered the larger strategy. They could not simply wait for the Bloodline to attack again. They had to understand their enemy, anticipate their moves, and be ready to strike if necessary. John used his knowledge of the land, the scouts' movements, and the intelligence Eliza provided to develop a plan that combined defense with calculated offense. It was risky, but he knew that passivity would only embolden the Bloodline. One evening, while surveying the perimeter, John noticed subtle signs that the bloodline was preparing for a larger assault. Trampled grass, fresh footprints, and faint markings on trees indicated a coordinated effort. The realization sharpened their focus. They would have to act decisively, relying on strategy, courage, and each other's strengths. Eliza, now more confident and determined, contributed ideas, showing resourcefulness and insight. Together they refined their plan, balancing caution with boldness. The tension reached its peak on a cold, moonless night. Figures emerged from the shadows, moving with precision and intent. This was no longer a scouting mission. It was a full-scale attack. John and Eliza, along with their loyal neighbors, moved into position. Each person knew their role, covering entrances, observing movement, and ready to respond. The ranch became a stage for strategy and courage, every action carefully measured to protect lives and repel the attackers. The confrontation was intense. The Bloodline's forces were strong, but John and his team used the terrain, traps, and coordinated defense to hold their ground. Shadows moved quickly, footsteps echoed through the fields, and whispers carried across the night. John's leadership and Eliza's growing skill were evident. They responded to each challenge, turning the Bloodline's attempts into opportunities to reinforce their defenses and test their resilience. Hours passed, and the attackers gradually realized that the ranch was well prepared. The Bloodline, despite their reputation for cruelty and intelligence, retreated once more, leaving behind a clear message. They were not finished, and they would return. John and Eliza stood together, exhausted but resolute. They had survived the first full-scale assault, proving that courage, preparation, and teamwork could withstand even the cruelest threats. As dawn broke, painting the hills with soft gold, John and Eliza reflected on the confrontation. The ranch had been tested, their courage proven, and their partnership strengthened. They knew the Bloodline would continue to pursue them, but they had also learned a valuable lesson. Fear could be managed, danger could be met with preparation, and even the most relentless adversaries could be challenged. The events of the night solidified their resolve. The ranch was more than a home. It was a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of preparation. John and Eliza understood that survival required vigilance, strategy, and the willingness to act decisively. They had faced the first true test of their abilities, and while the Bloodline shadow still loomed, they were no longer passive victims. By the end of Part 4, the ranch stood as a fortress of determination. John and Eliza had grown stronger, more confident, and ready to face the challenges ahead. The first major confrontation with the Devil's Bloodline had been a trial by fire, and they had emerged not just surviving, but learning, adapting, and preparing for the battles yet to come. The ranch, once quiet and peaceful, had become a battleground of courage and strategy, and its defenders were ready for whatever darkness might arrive next. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Carter Ranch, painting the fields in gold and soft shadows. The previous weeks had tested every ounce of John and Eliza's courage, the nights of planning, the hours spent observing the Bloodline, and the relentless tension had all led to this moment. Today, they would face the Devil's Bloodline in full. Not scouts, not warnings, but the family itself. John and Eliza stood on the porch surveying the land. The ranch, once a quiet haven, now felt alive with anticipation. Every tree, every fence, every shadow could hold danger or opportunity. John checked the barricades one last time. Every door was secured, every weak spot reinforced, and every hidden trap prepared. He had also positioned the neighbors strategically, each aware of their role. There was no room for error. Eliza, wrapped in a thick jacket, moved quietly beside him. She had grown stronger in ways she could not have imagined when she first arrived at the gate. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp, and her courage unshakable. Together, they were a team ready for the storm that was coming. By midday, signs of the Bloodline's arrival became clear. Dust clouds rose in the distance, and faint figures moved across the far hills. John watched through his binoculars, counting the number of attackers, estimating their strategy, and predicting their approach. He noted every detail, the speed of movement, the spacing, and the timing. Each observation would be crucial in turning the confrontation to their advantage. The first wave approached cautiously, testing the perimeter like the scouts had done before. John signaled to Eliza, who moved to her assigned position inside the barn, hidden behind bales of hay. The neighbors took their posts along the fences, blending into the shadows. John himself waited at the edge of the main field, ready to respond. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every breath conscious. The ranch had become more than home. It was a battlefield, and its defenders were prepared. The attackers advanced, confident but unaware of the careful planning that awaited them. As they neared the first fence line, traps set by John and his team were triggered. Bells rang, small rocks clattered, and false tracks misled them into areas with limited visibility. Confusion spread among the Bloodline attackers. John seized the opportunity, using a series of hand signals to coordinate with Eliza and the neighbors. They moved strategically, blocking paths, creating noise to distract, and forcing the attackers into positions where the ranch's defenders held the advantage. Eliza acted with precision. She moved silently between positions, using her knowledge of the ranch's layout to confuse and delay the attackers. Her courage shone brightly as she stepped into roles she had never imagined she could fill. John watched her with pride. This young woman, once terrified and on the run, was now a skilled partner, calm under pressure and ready to act decisively. Every movement, every decision mattered. The battle unfolded in a tense, calculated way. The Bloodline attempted to intimidate with shouts and gestures, but John and his allies remained composed. The night before the attack had been spent rehearsing scenarios, and now that preparation paid off. The attackers realized too late that the ranchers were ready for them, and that the land itself favored those who knew it intimately. The barn's fences and hills became more than terrain. They became tools of strategy, giving John, Eliza, and the neighbors a significant advantage. Hours passed as the confrontation escalated. Shadows moved through the trees, figures attempted to flank the defenders, and whispers of strategy filled the night. John and Eliza communicated with subtle signals, guiding each other and their allies. Every action was deliberate, designed to protect lives, minimize risk, and wear down the attacker's confidence. The Bloodline, though skilled and relentless, had underestimated the unity and preparation of the Carter Ranch. Midway through the confrontation, a critical moment arrived. One of the attackers attempted to breach the main house, the heart of the ranch's defenses. John acted quickly, signaling Eliza to assist from her position. Using the barn and fences as cover, she intercepted the intruder, surprising him with her speed and decisiveness. The attacker hesitated, giving John the chance to step forward and force him back. The coordination between the two of them was seamless. Trust, preparation, and courage converging in action. The Bloodline's forces began to falter. Their initial confidence gave way to confusion, frustration, and fear. John and his allies pressed the advantage, using knowledge of the land, careful traps, and clever distractions to repel the attackers. Eliza moved through the chaos with remarkable composure, her actions contributing directly to the defenders' success. She had become more than a survivor. She was a protector, a symbol of resilience and courage. As night approached, the remaining attackers retreated, leaving behind signs of their failed attempt. Broken branches, disturbed soil, and faint markings told the story of a family forced to respect the determination and strength of those they sought to intimidate. John and Eliza stood together, surveying the aftermath. The ranch had been tested, the Bloodline confronted, and the courage of the defenders had prevailed. Exhausted but triumphant, John and Eliza began to assess the damage and care for the ranch. Fences would need repair, paths cleared, and minor injuries tended to. Yet amid the labor, there was a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced a relentless threat, emerged stronger, and proven that courage, preparation, and unity could withstand even the most fearsome adversaries. In the days that followed, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The ranch was repaired, routines resumed, and the quiet work of tending to livestock and land continued. But the experience had left its mark. John and Eliza were changed, not just by the danger they had faced, but by the trust, courage, and resilience they had discovered in themselves and each other. Eliza, once fearful and uncertain, now walked with confidence across the fields, her head held high. She had faced the devil's bloodline and survived, proving not only her strength but also her ability to act decisively in the face of danger. John watched her with pride, understanding that her courage had been as essential to their survival as his own. Together, they had turned fear into action, uncertainty into strategy, and danger into an opportunity for growth. The bloodline did not return, at least not in force. Their retreat marked a turning point. While John and Eliza remained vigilant, they also understood that they had established boundaries that could not be easily crossed. The ranch, once isolated and vulnerable, had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and preparedness. The lessons learned during the confrontation would guide them in the future, ensuring that they were never caught unprepared again. The final days on the ranch were filled with reflection and quiet joy. John and Eliza spent time talking, planning, and rebuilding their sense of safety. They shared stories of the past, dreams for the future, and moments of quiet laughter that reminded them of life beyond danger. The ranch, once a place of routine labor, had become a testament to their courage, unity, and determination. As the sun set over the rolling fields, John and Eliza stood together on the porch, looking out over the land they had fought to protect. The air was filled with a familiar sense of earth, hay, and livestock, yet it also carried a new sense of possibility, a promise that courage and resilience could overcome even the darkest threats. They understood that danger might return, that life could be unpredictable, but they were prepared. Together, they could face anything. The ranch had survived. The bloodline had been challenged, and 2 lives had been transformed by courage, strategy, and trust. John and Eliza had proven that fear could be confronted, danger could be overcome, and life could continue with hope and determination. The Carter Ranch, once quiet and peaceful, now stood as a beacon of resilience and triumph. And as the night fell, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, stronger, wiser, and unafraid. In the end, the rancher and the young woman had not only defended a piece of land, they had discovered the strength within themselves and each other. The devil's bloodline, once a looming threat, had been confronted, their cruelty resisted, and their power diminished. John and Eliza had survived, learned, and grown. And as they watched the stars appear over the hills, there was a deep, unspoken understanding between them. They were no longer simply survivors. They were defenders, courageous and prepared, ready to embrace life with renewed hope.